Good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be fun because we hope to confirm what you folks already know about the amazing little newborns. Today, what we hope to share with you is our incredible respect for the capacities and the talents of the newborn. Specifically, I hope to speak to you of the kinds of conversations that I have with mothers and fathers and sometimes grandparents when they arrive for their first consultation visit. And please remember the context. The parents, as you know, are usually exhausted and totally consumed by the challenges of feeding, changing, and following the sleep patterns of this new little intrusion in their lives. Typically, they really have very little energy to look at the attributes of this little bundle of baby, and therefore see the wiggly little being on the examining table as a paralyzing and really mysterious member of their family. So my first goal with the families is to convey the wonder that I feel in holding the little baby in my arms. Sometimes I'm even as direct as saying, do you realize the amazing abilities of babies even at this age and how they're tuned into their environment? I find that I do that especially with very young parents who may not have had younger siblings to give them some direct input. I also take the opportunity to talk about sensitive responsiveness and how that is a major predictor of socio-emotional health in infants as they grow up. I then am very specific about counseling around our interactions with babies. That is, if your baby is sleeping, that's not really the time to start examining for tracking with a red ball or interacting noisily with them. I cradle the baby while describing the baby's tone and response to my touch in terms of vasodilatation, breathing rate, and movements. On occasion, I'm able to talk of how the baby quiets if he or she has been crying, and use the opportunity to speak, therefore, of self-regulation. In these descriptions, I'm using an integrated approach, really, of Barry Brazelton and Dr. Prechtel, Heinz Prechtel. I thus talk about the states of babies so that parents can begin to see behavior in categories. And you see the states here before you: deep sleep, light sleep, drowsy, alert, considerable motor activity, and crying. The similar kinds of states that you may see in some of your colleagues at times. It is interesting that I have had parents who really learn these well and seem to find themselves more in control, so that they explain to me when the baby is crying, "Oh, that's okay, he's only in state number 6. Depending on the baby's state, I sometimes go into an expanded explanation of their present state. So, for example, state number 2, the eyes are closed. The rapid eye movements can often be observed under closed lids. There's low activity level with random movements and startles, although the movements are smoother than in state 1. The baby responds to internal, that is, burping or flatulence, or external stimuli with startle equivalence, often with a resulting change of state. Respirations are irregular, sucking movements occur intermittently with eye opening briefly at intervals. All of these descriptions serve to enrich the classic response of, "Oh, what a cute baby." Babies are way more than that. Prechtel goes further with his description and chooses to zero in, for example, as you see in this incredibly gorgeous little baby, for example, on resting posture, relationship between the head, the trunk, and the upper limbs, looking for elements like undue rotation of the head, but most often describing an integrated and balanced posture, like this little itsy. On athodoid postures and movements, those in which some of the fingers are fully flexed while others are simultaneously extended, with simultaneous flexion of the elbow and rotation of the upper limb. Prematures, who have almost continuous athotoid movements, can be distinguished from the full-term baby, who tend to have athotoid postures only, which change from time to time. On tremor, the frequency above or below 6 per second and amplitude above and below 3 centimeters should also be noted. Therefore, all of these comments serve to show the physician and the parents the profound kinds of observations which can be made about even the simplest movements of the baby. Further proof of the enormity of the adventure of this new little being entering the home. Brazelton goes further to describe the impressive mechanisms in the neonate in decreasing responses to repeated disturbing stimuli. These tests are only attempted in the first 4 states that I talked about earlier, and the individual responses are extremely varied and rich. For example, following of an object, usually horizontally, but if the baby follows vertically, that's considered of a higher level, can lead to 9 different responses, all the way from not focusing or following the stimulus, through jerky following in a 30-degree arc with brightening, to following with smooth, continuous head movements horizontally and vertically in a circular path for a 180-degree arc. If you haven't hooked the parents with the wonder of their new baby after all of these observations, I actually sometimes tell parents that if babies they could talk, they'd be saying, "Hey Mom, look what I can do," just as they do in their later years. If that doesn't hook them, then I talk to them about their abilities in memory. Dr. Grace Valiente, a PhD psychologist at Concordia University, wished to determine if 2 to 3 day old newborns have better memory of a spoken word after a typical feeding than before a feeding, and if so, whether memory is related to blood glucose. A study was performed in which delayed recognition memory of a spoken word was examined either 120 minutes after the previous feeding or 30 minutes after their last feeding. In the procedure, infants initially turn their head toward a novel word called orientation, and with repeated presentations cease turning toward it, habituation. The mean number of trials to reach orientation and habituation criteria provides measures of attention and rate of learning. After a 100-second delay, the word is presented again. The words are either beagle or tinder. For the speech and language people among you, you'll know why those words were chosen. Infants either turn toward it, indicating that they have forgotten it, or remain habituated, indicating that they remembered the word. The study showed that memory for spoken words in newborns is better after a milk feeding, either bottle or breast. This effect is specific to memory and does not include attention and rate of learning. Thus, this study leads to many interesting developmental predictions, but in this context demonstrates to parents even more the potential of their little ones. When they speak to them, especially after feeding, those little supposedly non-responsive babies are actually remembering the words. Follow-up studies similar to Dr. Valiente's initial study has shown that this effect continues even at 2 to 3 weeks of age, so that one could postulate that iterative effects of memory enhancements post-feed, especially since babies are fed over 2,400 times in their first year, may indeed have cumulative effects over time. This kind of speculation has actually been examined by Hart and Risley in their 1995 book, Meaningful Differences in the Everyday Experience of Young American Children. They studied the vocabularies of 42 children from 1 year to 3 years and found that the most important factors to language acquisition are the economic advantages of children's homes, SES status, and the frequency of language experiences, meaning their exposure to utterances. The lower the SES of families, the less utterances the infants were exposed to, and the more utterances, the greater the vocabulary, to a substantial effect in the area of thousands of words. The 5 parenting features which predicted future achievement were language diversity, feedback, guidance style, language emphasis, and responsiveness. Thus, in my acknowledgement of the importance of our CPS Read, Speak, and Sing program, and Dr. Needleman's seminal teaching around the pivotal importance of language exposure, I do suggest that parents begin reading to their infants as early as possible. It's always wonderful to make a suggestion such as that, which we know is effective, when it is really an activity that parents do and look forward to doing. I usually wrap up the session with a further observation about the baby's activities, usually their bilaterally equal movements, and encourage the parents to keep track of their observations to share with me at the next visit. This kind of communication with parents can take place even with children who have developmental disabilities, because all little children have quite a number of capacities which can be discerned. As I say goodbye to the families, I cheer them on their way with a wish that they enjoy their special little baby as much as they possibly can. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jean to take us further on this little journey of these wonderful little babies.
So what I would like to do, Emmett and I had conversations about putting in some of the neuroscience. So as Emmett was talking about the various stages, I want to give you a demonstration from the neuroscience about what actually is going on. I first have to comment, Emmett, I finally understand my teenager's brain. They're continually in stage 2. Anybody else have that? Well, I don't know about the sucking. Well, let's not go there. Anyway, I always start my presentations dedicating them to my teachers, my mentors, my friends, the late Dr. Dan Offord and Clyde Hertzman. And I bring Clyde here particularly because he has changed so many of our lives. He talked about biological embedding. So as we heard Dr. Francoeur talk about the parents' responsiveness, as we heard about Hart and Risley and the parents engaging or not engaging in language exchange with their children, that is putting a signature on their DNA. And that DNA signature lasts a lifetime, and we learned that so well from Clyde. I also always bring Dan Offord. One, because as a scientist, he developed the EDI. He said we have to measure and we have to ask, what will we do with the answer? But he believed that if we have no data, we have no problem, and so there will be no action. So the wonderful document of Are We Doing Enough from the CPS, I think is a testament to the fact that we need to be looking at what we are doing, because if we're not measuring, then we don't have the effective voice. But you know, the other big thing about Dan was that no matter how busy he was, you had a sense of felt connection with him. You felt. And my dream, my goal, my kind of delusion, some of you have got some drugs for me, no doubt. My delusion, my hope is that every single child will have what Emmett was describing, and that is an adult whose eyes light up when they enter the room. I want to show you what we're learning in the neuroscience about what happens when somebody's eyes light up when you enter the room. Now, I talked to lots of people, and I talked to thousands of people about this, and then somebody told me that frickin' Oprah says the same thing. I said it first. But can you imagine in our work with children as pediatricians and infant, child, and adolescent psychiatrists, if that was the key message? If that was the key message, that does someone eyes light up in amongst all the other things that we need to do. So here is a little video just to confirm many of the things that Emmett spoke about.
In the quiet, alert state, newborns are capable of remarkable emotional engagement with those who can attune themselves to the baby's signals.
So many of the infant's responses are motivated by emotions, and parents sensitive to these signals can help a baby learn a little bit more about himself or herself in the process of learning how to communicate.
This series of photographs captures a wealth of interaction which transpires between 7-day-old Jordan and his grandfather during one 30-second period. Jordan and his grandfather have discovered each other. They begin a playful interaction while they look eye to eye. Jordan looks at grandfather's mouth and sees it open. He imitates this action and again looks eye to eye. As grandfather opens his mouth wide in laughter, Jordan follows, opening his mouth even wider. Jordan throws his arms in excitement and watches his grandfather's eyes, lifting his head like grandfather does. Now it's a game between them. Notice how Jordan lifts his left arm and actually reaches out and touches grandfather's mouth, where the game is being played. Grandfather now opens his mouth wider. And with great energy, Jordan follows suit. They take much delight in this joyful engagement. Jordan throws his head back and opens his mouth even a bit wider. A moment of pause, but they're still engaged. Now grandfather switches to puckering his lips. The baby looks at grandfather's face. Jordan focuses on the mouth and imitates the puckering. After Jordan turns away to rest, grandfather paces himself to the baby, which is so important. All infants need frequent rest periods during or after intense interactions. By moving at the infant's pace, parents can protect the baby from being overwhelmed.
Isn't that just amazing? How old is Jordan? 7 days old. My youngest, we have 5 children, my youngest is 19, and honestly, we would have said that was gas, right? Just let a belch out and he'll be better. So I think one of our messages here is, can we convey these amazing talents of the newborn to our colleagues? I remember meeting a family physician who was very, very proud of his 3-minute examination of the newborn. Flip, flop, and some other fickin' F, I don't know what it was. Flip, flop, and you finger, I don't know. But imagine introducing, as we've heard so beautifully, the infant is competent and capable, that you're starting right from the beginning to build the relational health between the infant and their caregivers. Now, I've been looking a lot into the early years and how the brain is built, and I keep coming across the wisdom and the teachings of our First Nations people, as well as newcomers to our country. Our First Nations people believe that children are the sacred ones, They are the heart of the nation. It is a sacred responsibility, not just for parents, but for the whole community to raise a child. And I kind of get sad when I go and read this, and then I realize that as non-Aboriginal people, we don't have the same heart to come home to. We've signed on to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but we all know we don't follow them. So what is our values-driven question about our children? Are we asking, as they do in Africa, how are the children? Or are we asking, how's the economy? How are the roads? How are the frickin' fighter jets or bombers or whatever they talk about? So I think our role as advocates is to bring the questions back to how are the children? And our children really are sacred ones. Now, why do we care about this? Well, it's a social justice issue, but really it's also all about the brain. I am not a neuroscientist, you should know that. I'm a clinician and I do a bunch of other things, but I steal wonderful, shiny knowledge from others and bring it to as many people as I can. So Fraser Mustard taught us that the brain is the master organ. It is an environmental organ, and it is built by the experiences that we have. The biggest time of change and growth is in the last trimester and goes on until probably 3, 4, 5, who knows? They're arguing, I'm just saying it's early. But then there's an explosion again in the teen years. We now know that the brain is under major construction until 24, 25 years of age. It takes longer in males, sometimes a lot longer. But we are our brains. So the experiences that we have as infants, whether we're being nurtured, whether someone is listening and picking up the baby's cues, reading, speaking, singing, is building our brain. In the Hart and Risley study, the kids all heard the same amount of busy words. Do this, don't do that, come here, what are you doing? The same number in all 3 of the groups. What was different was the felt connection words. How are you doing? Oh, isn't this exciting? Let's do this, then do that, then we'll come here. So babies and little ones are scientists. They are scientists in the crib. They are watching and absorbing the culture. Do you smile like this? Do you frown like this? They're little scientists. And you can imagine if in the first 3 years as a little scientist, you're hearing 13 million words, your neurons are going to be firing and connecting up, but not nearly as much as if you hear 43 million words. The brain is being built by the experience. Hart and Risley, one of their papers, was the 30 million word gap between the poor kids on average and the well-to-do. That is building their brain. And the architecture of the brain is sculpted by experience. How did they find this out? Well, Hubel and Wiesel won the Nobel Prize. They took little kittens very early on, sewed shut one of their eyes, and so don't listen if you love cats. They sewed shut one of their eyes very little, and then they took the stitches out. Now, the kittens couldn't see properly. And they realized that the stimulus, the experience of seeing, needed to happen at a certain time in order for the neuronal pathways and networks to be created. You see in the slide there that without stimulus, we've got a one-on-one synapse connection as an example, but the more there is experience, the more that the little ones were talked to and sung to, the more the brain grew. The more the connections were created. Now, it's not that all of the connections get created and then they all stay there. No, all these connections, sounds and sight, they can turn on the neurons, and you know all about synapses that talk to each other, but what are the ones that remain? Well, the ones that remain are the ones that are repeated over and over and over again. So here down in the corner here, you can see the little scientist at work. Look, why is that baby doing that? A couple of months old, why is that baby imitating that father there? Now, it's an old picture, I know, we haven't seen a fro like that for a long time. Okay, all right. but the little scientist in the crib is watching. And how are these neurons built? Well, it's by serve and return. The architecture of the brain is sculpted by experience, but the experience isn't flashcards. It ain't baby Einstein or baby Beethoven or baby Tupac or baby Bieber, I'm sure is on its way. You know, how to become a personality disorder in 3 easy lessons. But it is the serve and return. We have a culture now where parents don't trust in their own innate ability to parent. They think we need faster things. We need to be building better brains, like the rat study said. The rat study said if you've got a rat and he's got this Disney world, they have heavier brains, they can learn and they remember. But nobody asked the rat guys, what's the equivalent in the human brain? And it's us. It's the human face. It's the back and forth of every daily do's. It is the drip, drip, drip of everyday experience. So introducing in the newborn stage relational health and the huge power of the social brain. We are wired to connect. Now we know that the brain starts to make connections and starts to respond to sensory input in utero. We now in fact know that the brain also responds in utero to high stress. The MAVEN study is showing us that high stress in pregnancy, we're seeing smaller babies, more attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So there are times when the brain is more sensitive to what's going around. And Chuck Nelson's work shows us the sensitive periods in the brain. The concern is use it or lose it. There's big competition for that brain space, big competition. So what gets wired is the stuff that fires over and over again. This is from my colleague Bruce Perry. And this is a CT of a little boy who was raised in a crate. His parents thought he was possessed by the devil. Use it or lose it. So what happened to that little guy's brain? What happened to him is believed to be a concept called toxic stress. Why was his brain so small? One, he didn't get the stimulation coming in. He didn't have all of this wonderful excitement, eye to eye, eyes lighting up. The baby would have seen the grandfather's eyes dilate. That increases the heart rate, which increases glucose, which increases endorphins, which increases more activity in the brain, more BDNF, brain, miracle grow for the brain. That little guy in the crate didn't get that. Instead, he lived in toxic stress. Wonderful website, the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, talks about the different kinds of stress. And the stress we really have to worry about is this toxic stress. Tolerable stress, kids have those around them who help support them. Toxic stress is when it doesn't happen. And Dr. Mustard taught us a lot about this and took works from Ledoux as well as Martin Teicher, and in his work talked about how the stress system, and Bruce McEwen, how the stress system is set up. And I want to share with you a simplistic way that I have of thinking about it, which helps tons of the families and children I work with. So very simplistically, apologies to science. We have a stress response system, a response to threat, and it's why we're here as a species. As a species, when we perceive threat, our amygdala, particularly our right amygdala, fires, releases, goes through the HPA axis to release adrenaline, to release cortisol. On our hippocampus, which is new learning and memory, we have also glucocorticoid receptors. How many of those receptors is determined by the experience in early life. How many of the receptors is really important, because the receptors see how much cortisol there is and say, turn it off, we don't want this much cortisol. So in a stress situation, a high stress situation, up goes our adrenaline, up goes our cortisol, but our hippocampus with the receptors and the memory say, oh, it's okay, that door slammed shut, but it was the wind. But what if we were an infant whose parents didn't pick them up, whose parents shook them, whose parents were not helping them regulate? What's happening in their amygdala and in their hippocampus and as toddlers is that door slamming means that dad's coming in to beat me or beat mom, and that hippocampus is alerted, activated in a very different way. We are now seeing from the science that how the stress system, the HPA axis as an example, is created in the early years has a lot to do with how much health or disease we will have later. High stress situations lead to, chronic high stress lead to poorer health outcomes. Now, before I go more into that, let me just share with you, and again, apologies, how I teach kids and parents and judges about this in the brain. The amygdala is like my little porcupine here. And when a porcupine senses danger, up go the prickles. See up there, emotional stimuli. Now the porcupine releases adrenaline, releases cortisol, has a good buddy called the hippocampus. Guys, you need these in your office. So here's your hippo. They work really well together. Your hippo may be a little bigger since you walked in because you're remembering things that you learned earlier. There's a story that makes sense to you. The problem arises when that porcupine is firing. Hippo goes to sleep. There's no new learning. How much of our time in my world is spent where the porcupine is going all the time? How many of the families that you're dealing with, their porcupine's going because nobody's asked them, do you have enough money for food? Do you have enough money for rent? We're talking to them about things and they are, as one family said, my effing porcupine's going all the time. One family said, my social worker makes me drink, and I know the social worker, she makes me want to drink too. So here, how powerful is this interaction? This little 2-minute video here of the still face gives an example of how social we are. No, it doesn't. Gives an example of just how social we are as a species.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation.
So, what is actually happening? That's powerful. 2 minutes. And that baby, that mum is a researcher. She does this research, so you know she's been responding. She's been the good most of the time. So even that brief period. What is it in these last couple of minutes? What is science telling us is happening in the toxic stress? What is it that Clyde was helping us understand? And that is that as that baby is being responded to, the gene, the DNA is being told to be active, to be silent. The DNA is being altered, not the actual base pairs, but the activity, epigenetics, is changing. There's now science from Montreal, from Moishe Jiff and Michael Meany, that's showing that the actual activation or silencing of the genes through methylation is occurring in these parenting interactions. And when the gene becomes methylated, it means that the transcription factors can't come on and say, make more of that serotonin, make more of that glucocorticoid receptor so we can suck that frickin' cortisol out of here. In high stress, there's more methylation, so you can't get the building of those protective factors. And I'll close with something I learned from our friend Clyde and as well as Emmett. These butterflies are epigenetically modified. These are the Preci octavia butterflies, just so you know, and Emmett knows way more, ask him. But in the wet season, they're genetically exactly the same. In the wet season, they have a particular behavior. In the dry season, they have a very different behavior and different color. We are seeing this in our practice. We are seeing these stark contrasts in our practice. When we see infants who are engaged and thriving, who are curious about us when they see us, and infants who are pulling back, who are alarmed, who are frightful, who don't turn to their parents for support and comfort when they get their immunization. The Cree legend, one of them is, I heard from Tom Porter, an elder, is that life is a struggle. We've got good in us, we've got bad in us. And it's like we've got two wolves fighting, angry, greedy, jealous. And the other wolf in our brain is kind, is generous, is joy. And one of the little ones up front says, "Grandfather, which wins the battle?" And he said, "It depends which one you feed. It depends which one you feed." We have the science. We must be taking it into action because what happens early lasts a long time. But also the power of one adult in a child's life is massive. How about we collect all of our powers of one up for all of our kids?